So good afternoon, good evening. I would like to welcome you to our seminar. Today we'll talk about the new book from Ekaterina Shapiro-Obermair. Ekaterina is a visual artist, curator, and researcher based in Vienna. She studied at several art academies in Nuremberg and in Vienna and completed her PhD at the Academy of Fine Arts, Vienna in 2022. Her doctoral work looks at how World War II is publicly commemorated in Lviv in Ukraine. And more broadly, she works on the post-Soviet region with a focus on architecture, city planning, and visual and memory cultures. In her artistic and research projects, she combines social scientific methods like interviews and participant observation with a strong visual analysis. And she has also contributed to several research projects and exhibitions like Museum of War with Alexandra Wachta and exhibition Soviet Modernism 1955 till 1991. She's also author or editor of several books, including Geschichte Performen, we're talking about, and History of Other Objects in 2020. She has received multiple awards, including the main prize for the best doctoral thesis and Academia of Fine Arts in 2022, and the Theodor Korner Prize in 2017. Her new book examines public gatherings in Lviv between 2014 and 2022 that reference to World War II. And she's looking at these events and shows how different groups negotiate Ukraine's complex past, especially the legacy of Holocaust and how Cold War era and still influence interpretations of memory today in Ukraine. And our discussant today is Misha Gabowicz. Misha is a historian and sociologist and professor of multilingual and transnational post-Soviet studies at Johannes Gutenberg University in Mainz. He studied in Oxford and Paris and has held positions in Princeton, Vienna, and Einstein Forum in Potsdam. He has written and edited many books on protest movements and on memory and commemoration, including protests in Putin's Russia, replacing atonement, the sociology of Belarusian protest, and beyond representation. His latest book, co-authored by Mykola Homaniuk, is Monuments and Territory, War Memorials in Russian-occupied Ukraine, that was published in 2025. Thank you. Ekaterina, Misha, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you a lot for the introduction, and probably I will start with the introduction of the book, and then we will come to the talk with Misha, and I will share my screen. Yes. Oh, sorry.
We can, yes, thank you. We can see, I can see your screen.
Yeah. Okay, I will start. Yeah, today we'll talk about my book. I will speak about 30 minutes, and then we will see how the discussion emerges. So the book is written in German, and translated into English, its title is Performing History, Public Commemoration on World War II in the context of the Russo-Ukrainian War. And I often counter the assumption that the book is about monuments, or even more specific, about war monuments in Ukraine. And I assume that these people have not actually read it. The book is not about monuments, but about practices. And let us simply call them commemorations at the beginning. And but since the book is written in German, as I already said, I assume that not everyone attending the seminar today has been able to read it, or even to probably people who will watch the recordings later. So I will do my best to make it accessible through my presentation, but it's also a great opportunity for me to present my work to a non-German audience. So it was published, as Alina already said, in October 2024, almost exactly 1 year ago. And it is based on my dissertation, which I wrote at the Academy of Fine Arts, Vienna. I submitted my work in October 2021 and defended in April 2022. And there is nothing special in waiting for 6 months for the defense. But in my case, between finishing writing and defending my work, a significant event occurred, which I probably do not need to explain closer. In February 2022, Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And beyond other dramatic outcomes of this war, fundamentally changed the entire academic field. Ukraine, previously often marginal in academic discourse, suddenly moved to the center of attention across various disciplines. Events and figures that had been known only to specialists suddenly became topics of broad scholarly interest. Established terms came into question, acquired new meanings, or had to be reformulated. And while preparing the manuscript for publication, I could not fully respond to this rapid development. That would have required a different book entirely. But yet, as I revisited the text, I was surprised to find that most of my observations and considerations remain valid. And I believe the work is more than just a time document and is still relevant. So I acknowledge that some perspectives may read differently from today's vantage point. And the dissertation itself grew out of an interdisciplinary project called Lviv Museum of War, which Alina already mentioned before, which I developed with historian Alexander Vakhta starting in 2015. We explored together a hypothetical scenario. What if Lviv, a major city in Western Ukraine, were to build a museum dedicated to the Second World War? Our central questions were, how might such a museum look? Where could it be located? And most importantly, which narratives should be included and which excluded? So the photograph on the cover of the book was taken in April 2017 during our last joint research trip to Lviv. And during this project, I began to focus on assemblies in urban space. And my main outcome was film de facto. I gave the link in the announcement to this event, and maybe we can discuss later the relation between the film and the book. But let me explain a bit more closely what I mean by these collective practices. In the book, I used the term assemblies, and these are both ritualized commemorative events held annually on certain, mostly historical dates, and also spontaneous political actions or demonstrations. What is important is the significance of these gatherings is by no means limited to their declared goals. They cannot be reduced to the function of mourning only alone. So when people are coming together to collectively remember any event from the past, they are led by a much broader variety of motives than remembering and grieving. Furthermore, these collective practices do not solely refer to a historical event to be remembered, but are placed in an ongoing dialogue with the previous occurrences of the ceremony. In any case, as these assemblies happen in the present, they also reflect, perhaps even more forcefully, the current situation. In the context of the Russo-Ukrainian War, they reveal how the perception of World War II correlates with contemporary experiences of violence. While monuments and museums are largely static, they can be examined through their origin, their form, and their effects. Commemorations require a very different approach. The annual proceedings are not fixed. They change from year to year. Even though they follow certain patterns or scripts, written or unwritten, their course always contains a degree of unpredictability. They take place in public spaces, which are more or less open to everyone, and involve a range of actors, organizers, participants, or often random passers-by. Simple factors, such as bad weather or good weather or overlapping schedules, can influence how they unfold. However, these details should not be overinterpreted politically. And here we see the list of events I analyzed in the book and attended and filmed almost all of them. Together with Alexandra at first, and later on my own, I also conducted interviews with participants, passers-by, and representatives of institutions or associations involved in the organization. And I additionally reviewed a wide range of press coverage related to these occasions. Through the analysis of these events, I seek to understand what kind of historical knowledge they transmit. I look at both the content of the speeches and the performative course of these ceremonies. My approach draws on an interdisciplinary perspective informed by visual culture studies and media studies, in which description and interpretation go hand in hand. The book consists of 6 chapters, and I'm going to go very briefly through each of them. So the opening chapter clarifies the study's theoretical framework. Chapter 2 introduces the history of Lviv, its urban development, its architecture, and contextualizes specific sites of assemblies. Chapter 3 focuses on 2 commemorative dates marking the end of World War II in Europe, the Day of Remembrance and Reconciliation on May 8 and Victory Day on May 9. Chapter 4 addresses the remembrance of the 2 main ethnic or religious minorities of Lviv, the Polish and Jewish communities. And in my eyes, it is the most interesting chapter of the book in terms of novelty of research. And that's why I highlighted it in bold here. And I will speak about all these chapters a bit more, but the chapter 4 I will introduce more extensively. And chapter 5 examines activities around one of the region's most prominent war memorials, the so-called Monument of Glory. And the final chapter investigates gatherings carried out by those who promote a national or nationalist historical narrative in the urban space of Lviv. And here I have already introduced one of the key terms I use through the book, the national or nationalist historical narrative. And let me turn to the first theoretical chapter to explain my theoretical framework. So the chapter begins with conceptual reflections on the term post-Soviet and the ongoing divergences between the former East and the former West. And I argue that this persistent split is rooted in the fundamentally different ways the Holocaust was addressed in these 2 opposing political systems. This argument is central for the entire book, and I will return to this in more detail later. Subsequently, the chapter provides an overview of the dynamics of Ukrainian historical politics after 1991 and places them in an international context. Concluding the chapter comes the methodology, which I briefly provided above. But before I introduce my theoretical framework, and I would also like to do it now very briefly, so central for my text is Judith Butler's performative theory of assembly. And I will read, if I can, because I don't see it. I will read only the first line from the quotation, which I place in the beginning of the book and return to it at the end. So it's what the assembly does and what it says are linked together, so they're not always the same. In her work, Butler shows that assemblies are performative acts. So when people come together in public space, they communicate something that exceeds any explicit program or speech simply by their bodily presence. As an example, she brings honor guard, which has a meaning without any words being spoken. And so this idea has been very inspiring for my work. And of course, I also draw on memory theories, particularly Jan Assmann's concept of communicative and cultural memory, which refers to questions of generational memory, and on Michael Rosbeck's model of multidirectional memory. In a place like Lviv, with its multiple competing narratives, Rosbeck's model is especially useful. It shows how these narratives relate to each other dynamically, rather than simply excluding one another. Analyzing the rhetoric of speeches, I rely on Tatiana Voronina's investigations into the correlation between Soviet history writing and the literary canon of social realism. And one final point I want to illustrate with a slide. So Georgy Kasyanov understands the Ukrainian historical politics after 1991 as a struggle between Soviet nostalgic and Ukrainian national or Ukrainian nationalistic narratives. And I adapt this model and expand it in my work by adding two further narratives, particularly important for Lviv, the Polish one and the Jewish one. And speaking of the city brings me to the second chapter. So the book focuses on Lviv. This city occupies a unique position in Ukrainian myth-making and nation-building. Historically, Lviv has been a center of Ukrainian nationalism, and it still maintains a strong national identity. However, it is important to emphasize that developments in Western Ukraine cannot represent the entire country with its regional diversity. And equally important is that Lviv's identity cannot be reduced solely to its Ukrainian national past and present. So this chapter tells the history of the city through its monuments, with a particular focus on the history of the 20th century. And I don't believe there is a need to introduce this history of Lviv in detail here, as I'm sure most of you are familiar with the main features of its complex history. Just to mention the key point, for over a century, Lviv was part of the Habsburg Empire. After its collapse in World War I, the city came under Polish rule. In World War II, as a Polish city, was first occupied by the Soviets in 1993, but then came under German occupation in 1941. During this period, which lasted about 3 years, nearly the entire Jewish population was murdered. That means approximately 1/3 of the inhabitants. 1944, Lviv was incorporated again into the Ukrainian Soviet Republic. After the war, most Poles were deported, so the majority, so the majority of the population became Ukrainian. And currently, Lviv is the westernmost major city in Ukraine, located approximately 60 kilometers from the Polish border. However, this introduction is important for the book. It provides insights into the city's development and locates the various sites of memory where the assemblies are analyzed in later chapters took place. The chapter also makes the choice of the city as a case study comprehensible. It shows why so many conflicting historical narratives come together in this specific place. And let me show you some images from this chapter. For example, here we see an assembly at the Hill of Glory. This Soviet military cemetery is an important site of memory for supporters of the Soviet nostalgic narrative. Or here we see there's a small demonstration in front of the controversial monument to Stepan Bandera, a very known monument. And here one more. So the Lonsky prison, another significant site of memory in Lviv. Here we see commemorations organized by the city council on May 8. At that time, a relatively young commemorative date in Ukraine. And just a remark, in the publication, I used only my own photographs, but in black and white, not in color as you see them here. And so this image provides us actually to the next chapter. So the chapter 3. So the chapter 3 looks at ceremonies on two commemorative dates, as I already said, May 8 and May 9. And both commemorate the end of World War II in Europe, but have very different stories behind. Well, Victory Day was a major political holiday in the Soviet calendar. May 8 only began to be celebrated in Ukraine in 2014, following the outbreak of the Russo-Ukrainian War, with the intention of distancing the country from Russian or Soviet commemorative traditions and instead align itself with the European memory canon. And here I would prefer to show you more images right away to show you the places and the practices. So here we see commemorations on Field of Mars, also a military cemetery. And here we see the Hill of Glory with many performative acts which are coming from the people themselves. So this woman came to this place with books about the Great Patriotic War and carrying them. So this woman came with a portrait of her father and performed on her own the Immortal Regiment. So this man, Vladimir Shapiro, was coming regularly to the Hill of Glory on May 9, and he was always dressed as a Red Army soldier on these occasions. And here we see commemorations organized by the city council on a different location. It's an area of the former Stalag 328. And here, staged performance, but performed by people who attended the commemorations. So they were asked to tie paper puppets on a symbolic wall of barbed wire. A comparison of these public commemorations is particularly instructive for understanding the difference between events organized by state or municipal authorities, as on May 8, and those initiated by local communities and civil society groups, as on May 9. And this distinction between state-organized and grassroots commemorations applies to all the other events I analyze in the book. On the one hand, public commemorations can serve as a medium through which governments convey normative historical views to their citizens. They provide official narrative on national history. On the other, these gatherings enable various population groups to express their political or social demands by appealing to historical justice. This juxtaposition between the celebrations on these two dates also illustrates, obviously, the tensions between competing historical narratives. Those emphasizing a national or nationalistic interpretation of Ukrainian's past, and those reflecting Ukrainian-influenced historical perspectives. Yet, other national and religious minorities, Polish and Jewish, also assembled in the city to express their claims on the local past. And I'm coming to the fourth chapter. I decided to combine these two ethnic or religious minorities of Lviv in one chapter, despite their differences. To name one of them, so while the Poles living in Lviv today descend from families who also lived there before World War II, the Jewish community's ancestors mostly arrived from other parts of the Soviet Union after the war. This difference in historical rootedness has important consequences. Simply put, in Polish families, knowledge about the local past could, at least in theory, be passed through family channels. By contrast, Jewish families had few direct connections to the local history of the war period, which limited the transmission of memory across generations. What surprised me most during my research was that even prominent figures of Lviv's Jewish community initially had no idea about the cause of the Holocaust in the city. And it was horrific. And according to their interviews, they only began to learn about it in the early 90s through their involvement in relevant institutions. What unites these two groups, the Polish and the Jewish community of Lviv, is their status as minorities within the Ukrainian majority, along with the legacy of old rivalries, animosities, and mutual prejudices. In this chapter, I examine how knowledge of what happened in Lviv during World War II is transmitted within both communities. For the Polish community, the central dates in this regard are July 3rd or 4th, the anniversary of the murder of Polish academic elite by the Germans in 1941. For the Jewish community, it is the International Holocaust Remembrance Day on January 27. And I will show you two images here. These are the main memory sites for the Holocaust remembering. It's the memorial to the victims of the Lemberg ghetto. And this is a memorial stone at the site of the former Lemberg-Janowska camp. I also trace in this chapter the emergence of new actors in Jewish memory work, particularly academic circles, who are playing an increasingly important role in shaping public memory of the Holocaust through, among other means, the creation of new sites of memory and the organization of commemorative events. So this chapter became a turning point for my research. It led me to focus on how other groups relate to the Holocaust. Do they mention it in relevant context? For instance, when listing civilian war victims, when listing civilian war victims, or do they omit it? When they do mention Holocaust, how do they do it? What language do they use to describe the murdered Jews? This lens enables me to place contemporary memory culture in Ukraine within a broader European context. In this light, the alleged division between the pro-Russian East and the pro-Ukrainian West of the country appears less crucial than the distinction between the Western canon of memory and its post-Soviet counterpart. In so-called Western memory discourse, the Holocaust serves as a central negative founding myth. In Soviet historiography, by contrast, the entire period of the World War II is understood primarily through its military dimension, which continues to play a central role in contemporary identity formation. Rather than perpetrate the victim constellation, which shaped the Western discourse on the Holocaust as well as other conflicts and genocides, post-Soviet historiography is still often based on the antagonism between hero and enemy. Instead of the passive figure of the witness or the opportunistic collaborator, the self-sacrificing martyr emerges. Ukraine's effort to integrate itself into the European Union, however, demands the inclusion of the history of the Holocaust in the national history. Yet, one of the main difficulties on this path lies in reconciling remembering victims of the Holocaust with the positive image of the glorified liberation struggle, as well as coming to terms with the local population's involvement in the killing of Jews. The contemporary practices I analyzed reveal an ongoing negotiation between these two memory canons, with the Western canon discourse gaining influence, but not yet entirely replacing Soviet patterns. And shortly after the book came out, I published an article on this topic, and it's in English, so it's accessible. It is not a translation of the chapter, but it's based on the same materials. And for those who are interested in the subject, I would recommend reading this. And I will just touch the following two chapters to try to stay briefly. So chapter 5 is dedicated to one site of memory, the so-called Monument of Glory, which was erected in 1917 and dismantled in 2021. The collective actions introduced in the chapter were conducted by two opposing groups, proponents of the Soviet historical narrative and their rivals. All these activities, among them were also very brutal and destructive, served stronger political rather than commemorative purposes. And now I'm working on a film which is based on this chapter and which I'm going to present during the PoSoCoMeS conference in Yerevan. And I'm not sure if it will be entirely finished until then, but the structure is there, and I'm sure I will be able to present the first sketch at least. And just starting the last chapter, so while the previous chapters built on the juxtaposition of different commemorative groups, opposing groups, the final one turns to what appears at first glance to be a unified youth community, those who promote a national or nationalist historical narrative in Lviv's urban spaces. Upon closer examination, however, it is revealed that these groups were very heterogeneous and that they pursued different objectives through their commemorative events and actions. Further, this chapter gives an overview of historical events these groups choose to commemorate. And these are highly specific events, little known beyond Western Ukraine, but essential to understanding nation-building processes. And I will show you just 3 images, which are the most actually problematic in the entire book. Not just these 3 images, but all the images, or most of the images I put in this chapter. And I'm coming to the end. So taking all these chapters together, all the events analyzed in the book provide a multifaceted portrait of a pluralistic society in transformation. By immersing readers in specific situations, sentiments, and context, the book offers insights into Ukrainian complex history and demonstrates how it is negotiated by people on the ground. And I thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take questions.
All right, I guess that's the cue for me as the discussant. So thank you very much, Ekaterina, for this presentation, which I'm sure will be very useful, as you said, not only for those who are present with us in this Zoom session, but also for those who will watch this later in the recording. Now, I don't want to take up too much time because I know there are other people who will want to ask questions. And because of that, I will not be able to do justice to the book, which is extremely rich and is full of both interesting theoretical contributions, but also lots of varied observations on a wide variety of elements of these commemorative practices. Now, I want to make a few general points. So first of all, why do I think this is a really important book that will sort of occupy a very important position in the literature on commemoration? So there has been a lot of scholarly interest in post-Soviet war commemoration for a number of years now. A lot of people have written about commemorative practices, mostly in connection with Victory Day in the Soviet and post-Soviet tradition, so around the 9th of May. I have myself co-directed two large-scale projects of multi-sited ethnography. We published books in Russian and German, where dozens of authors who participated in these projects provided article-length ethnographies of different kinds of commemorative ceremonies, which had something to do with Victory Day, with the 9th of May, usually had come out one way or the other of the Soviet tradition, and were kind of topographically linked to Soviet war memorials. And people writing in this vein or also in similar veins, sometimes using quantitative material, have also written about Ukraine. So in our project, we had a number of papers on Ukraine. There was a paper a number of years ago by Galina Nikiforets-Takigawa, who wrote specifically about Victory Day celebrations in Lviv in 2011 and the clashes that took place around that date at the time. But as far as I know, Ekaterina's book is really the first book-length study of commemorative practices in a single post-Soviet city. So it's not, a single article as a contribution to an edited volume, but it's an entire book. And what's more, it focuses not only on these 9th of May celebrations that kind of take up and reproduce and sometimes modify and transform the Soviet tradition, but the really original thing that she does is that she really kind of starts from the space of the city and then looks at all the different groups that are engaged in commemorative practices, sometimes in the same spaces, sometimes in rival spaces, but with very, very different historical, ideological, political, generational backgrounds. So it's really kind of a fascinating and extremely rich kaleidoscope of all these different commemorative practices that kind of come together, oppose each other, etc. And so I think that is the most original feature of the book, right? So that it doesn't focus on one particular set of actors, one particular style of commemoration, but really it looks at all these different commemorative practices together in comparison, and that allows her to really come up with lots of fascinating and sometimes very unexpected observations. And by the way, for those of you who are unable to read the book in German, Ekaterina mentioned the film that was one of the products of the original project, and I really highly recommend that you watch it. It's a relatively short film, and I think it does give a good visual but also sound impression of these different kinds of commemorative practices. And of course, both the film and the book are dedicated to this extremely important and now almost half forgotten period after the beginning of the Russo-Ukrainian War in 2014, but of course before the escalation in 2022. And I agree that this means that its interest is not just kind of antiquarian, because we now feel that this period is over and has been transformed and replaced by something else. But it really gives us kind of a point of comparison, which will allow us to see exactly what changed between the period of pre-2014 and after the beginning of the war, but then also especially before and after 2022. And I think it's very important to have this kind of extremely detailed and sophisticated study about the period before 2022, because, the way memory works, including the memory of the scholarly community, is that as soon as things start changing, we tend to project the present state of affairs into the past. And it's very important to have, this detailed documentation of how things were somewhat different before 2022. Another very important point, and Ekaterina mentioned this, but I really want to stress it even more strongly, is that she goes well beyond the usual dichotomy of two narratives that people still even today sometimes sort of continue to cling to when they talk about historical memory and commemoration in Ukraine, specifically the dualism between a kind of nationalist or national narrative of Ukrainian history and specifically of Ukraine in the Second World War, and on the other hand, the kind of Soviet tradition of commemorating the Great Patriotic War. So the first distinction that she makes, and I mean, she's not entirely the first one, but I think she may be the first one to really apply it to a detailed analysis of commemorative practices, is between a national and a nationalist commemorative culture. And I think that's actually quite an important distinction, and maybe it has become even more important today, because of course there is, on the one hand, the idea that, Ukraine is a nation in its own right with its own national culture, which includes strong elements of an ethno-national culture with its own national poets, Taras Shevchenko, etc., etc., and appealing to them is, among many other things, a way to sort of stress the autonomy and agency and kind of separate existence of Ukraine as a culture and a nation. But then, on the other hand, there's the much more radical nationalist tradition, which tends to refer to the UPA, the Ukrainian nationalist fighters before, during, and after the Second World War, which has a very strong kind of ultra-right, radical right element. And the two things sometimes, especially, of course, in Russian war propaganda, tend to be conflated. And so I think it's important to distinguish between them and also show in practice that even though there can sometimes be overlaps and sometimes they merge, there is also an important distinction, in particular in the way in which Ukrainian politicians are involved in some commemorative ceremonies, but not in others. But then the next distinction, which is very important, and this is very very dear to me, is between these different sort of pan-national narratives, so national or nationalist on the one hand, Soviet or pro-Soviet on the other hand, and the kind of ethnic minority narratives. And it so happens that I'm currently finalizing a paper with my friend and co-author Mykola Homanyuk, where we're talking about all the different ethnic and local and corporate traditions in Ukraine today, which were especially important in 2022. And we tried to show that many people who joined Ukraine's struggle against the Russian invasion were motivated not necessarily by a kind of national or nationalist justification, or by the idea that there was the Great Patriotic War, the fight against the German fascist invaders, and that is similar to how Ukraine is now fighting against the Russian fascist invaders. But in fact, that there were, in addition, many other ethnic narratives. The Crimean Tatars have their own vision of history. The Poles have their own vision of history. Hungarians, of course, Greeks, Bulgarians, all the different ethnic minorities, but also different corporate groups. For example, the Ukrainian railroad workers also have a very strong tradition of a corporate identity of their own. And I think in this context, it's very important that Ekaterina in her book focuses on these additional minority ethnic narratives, specifically the Jewish and Polish one, and show how they are in many ways intertwined with other things that one can find in Lviv, and they are not in any way just sort of emanations of a generic Jewish memory, be it a post-Soviet Jewish memory or a cosmopolitan Jewish memory. And they're also not exactly the same as the kind of Polish memory that one would find in Poland. But at the same time, there's also a very problematic relationship with local history, right? As she was just saying, a lot of people in the Jewish community in Lviv, for example, actually have no communicative memory of what happened in the Holocaust in Lviv and Western Ukraine in particular. So they're sort of reconstituting these events for themselves. Another important feature of the book, to my mind, is that it is one of the very first to really more or less apply Michael Rothberg's idea of multidirectional memory to a post-Soviet context, right? So a lot of people, Vitaly Chernetsky, for example, and others have looked a little bit into this and sort of tried to think about what it might mean to interpret memory traditions in different parts of Ukraine, different Ukrainian cities, through the prism of multi-directional memory. But I think here, probably, unless I've missed something, we have the first sort of book-length study that really shows how this can be a very productive lens through which to look at the ways in which different mnemonic and commemorative traditions influence each other. And then another very sort of, nice and original feature of the book to me is how, on the one hand, it shows that very different kinds of commemorations that, ideologically are completely distinct from each other, as sometimes radically opposed to each other, can still, in fact, be very similar when you look at them as performances. Right? If you analyze them through the lens of performativity, visuality, etc. And this is something that I've also very often encountered in my work, both on commemorative movements and protest movements, that analyzing them through the lens of ideology is one thing, but once you actually juxtapose many of them, you see that very often they draw on the same canon, right? So in the book, you can read about how for example, a lot of Ukrainian nationalist ceremonies. In fact, if you didn't know what people were saying, could be almost mistaken for Soviet-style ceremonies because the choreography, the type of performance that they engage in is in fact very similar. And this made me think of a conversation I had with Ivo Mainzen, who is a wonderful historian of the Soviet Union and now a wonderful Swiss journalist specializing, among other things, in Ukraine. And we were in Lviv together, and he said, well, my next project is to write about the Bandera Museum in Bandera's hometown. And I think it's one of the most Soviet museums I've ever seen. Right. So that this is a site of memory, a museum dedicated to, almost you could say the quintessential anti-Soviet figure, but the way that the museum is set up, the way that this sort of heroic narrative is presented, could be, straight out of any Soviet museum dedicated to the Great Patriotic War. So, the content has been shifted, but the narrative structures are still very much the same. So I know that I've already taken up a lot of time, so I want to now maybe ask some questions to kick off the discussion, and then wait for Ekaterina's responses, and then maybe if there aren't enough questions in the discussion, I'll ask some more things. So my first question is this. So I mentioned that Mykola and I are working on these other sort of ethnic minority mnemonic narratives, the corporate identities, etc. And I would be curious to know whether in your fieldwork in Lviv, beyond the Jewish tradition and the Polish tradition that you describe in the book, you also had a chance to observe other kinds of minority commemorative ceremonies. There is a small but quite active Armenian community in Lviv, for example. There is a very long, centuries-old tradition of Tatar presence, right? There are other ethnic minorities, and now, of course, things are changing even more because there's so much internal migration from other parts of Ukraine to Lviv, bringing sort of even new groups to the city. So I'm wondering whether, in addition to the, let's say, larger minority focus ceremonies that you describe, you also have any sort of data about other smaller groups and their own maybe kind of ethnic or corporate vision of the Second World War and other important historical events. The second question, I guess, is quite obvious. What has happened since 2022? And I know that, as you said, you had finished writing the original dissertation before February 22, but I also know that you've been following events in Lviv very closely. You've been helping Ukrainians and in particular Ukrainian artists from Lviv. So I'm sure that you are much better placed than most other people to tell us about how these sort of commemorative practices have changed and in what way, as you mentioned in your own presentation, they have stayed the same, but also in what ways they have become transformed. And the final question is sort of future oriented or maybe about your normative assessment. So, I mean, the book is very kind of analytical and academic, but you mentioned in your presentation that it grew out originally of an artistic project that was informed, among other things, by essentially a normative question. What should a museum of war or of the Second World War in Lviv look like? And in the book, of course, you are, in a sense, neutral, but one could also say that you are actually equally critical of all sides, right? And actually, one of the things I loved about the presentation is that you are not afraid to talk about how some of these events are really comical, right? And this is something that I think many of us who have engaged in observing these kinds of commemorative ceremonies have often noted, but I often find it difficult to write about this directly because it might sound almost disrespectful, but I think you have a very good sort of analytical explanation for why sometimes these events seem really comical to outside observers because they take elements from really disparate contexts and they sort of throw them together in a completely new context, which looks bizarre. And, in the book that I wrote with Mykola Humaniuk, we have an example of a priest in the Russian-occupied part of Ukraine leading a Victory Day procession with a big cross and singing the song День Победы from 1975 from a completely kind of secular Soviet context. But I think we were too afraid to talk about how that is really a comical thing. So, given that you're sort of you're critical and you keep your analytical distance from all sides equally, but also that you think along the lines of Michael Rothberg's multidirectional memory about sort of possible fluidities and sort of productive mutual influences between these different commemorative traditions. So if you had kind of godlike or at least mayoral powers in a place like Lviv, and drawing on everything that you observed for this study, what do you think a really meaningful commemorative practice for the Second World War could look like in the city, given the new context of an ongoing, very brutal war? And I will end here.
Wow. No, thank you for your great extensive comments. I'm very pleased to hear it because it's like the first time something telling me so many nice words about my book. And there are quite many questions. I will. Am I frozen?
I can see you. I can hear you moving. So no.
Okay. Now it's fine. Okay, there are many questions. I hope I will not leave them out. The first one was about other minorities. Unfortunately, I have a disappointing answer. No, I was not able to trace any, but I was actually not really looking for. Also, in this regard, I should say that also regarding the Holocaust, I'm dealing just with Shoah, just with the murder of the Jewish population of Lviv. I'm not dealing with killing of people with disabilities, of some other groups, homosexuals, which were also killed. I did not do any research in this direction. I don't know enough. There were definite. I'm not sure if this research is already done because in my historical explanations, I was referring to secondary literature. So I was my primary sources were the observations of the commemorative events. So then the next question was what happened after 2022. I went to Lviv just once after the full-scale invasion was launched. It was in 2023, and I went to observe the commemorations on the Holocaust Remembrance Day on the 27th of January. It was very important for me to see what changed, what was the same. So what was the same? Actually, the same people came. The people who were there in the previous years, so they came again. So some probably some new actors appear. For example, the representatives from the Museum Territory of Terror were there. They were not there in the years 2016 or 17 because this museum became a very important commemorative actor in the city. So with Olga Honchan as its director, so the museum has changed its agenda. But what is probably the most important change, so I write about this in my article, that when I observed the commemorations in 2017, the Holocaust was not used to compare some other events during the commemoration. And this has changed dramatically in 2023. It was used, so because I was focusing, following the idea by Michael Rosbeck of multidirectional memory, so how one event in the past can be used to understand any other event in the present. And during these events, this comparison between the current war and the Holocaust was pronounced, but it was pronounced in more complicated ways, not just that we suffer now, we Ukrainians are suffering now, how Jews were suffering during the Second World War. It was also said that as during World War II, Jews were killed by their neighbors, so now Ukrainians are killed by their neighbors as well. So it was so they this comparison was actually they were comparing Ukrainians with Russians. So I heard this during one guided tour, that Ukrainians were killing Jews and now Russians are killing Ukrainians. So the comparison was between so that it might happen that neighbors are killing neighbors, that relatives are killing relatives. And that was surprising for me. So that the comparison was not just in the position of suffering, but also in the position of perpetrator. So that was quite surprising. Then, so the museum, I'm not sure if I can probably, Lviv has even too many museums and has too many monuments. Probably, I'm not sure that, I think it has so many other problems at the moment that it's probably not the most current one, but this is the question which I cannot respond that quickly in a good way. Maybe I should think a bit more. And regarding the comic, yes, the comic is extremely important thing. I also try to create a theoretical framework about these comic elements. I think it's like it indicates if you feel that something is funny, it's an important moment that indicates that something does not really go together. So that some things are overlapping in a funny way. And but it's funny only if it's funny for you as observer, it does not mean that it's also funny for the others, because they don't feel it because they are involved. And it's funny for you because you are standing aside. In my book, I refer to, in this regard, to André Bergson, who writes that if you stay on the street and see how someone is working around and his head is flying away and he runs behind his head, for you it may be funny because you look to it from outside, but for this person it's not funny at all. And I think that's also what has changed after 2022. As I came to Lviv, it was not funny at all. So the things which were funny, they became very, very sad. So it's, yeah, it means that something has changed in our position as observers as well. If we don't feel these funny things anymore, it's yeah, I don't know. And I was not able, as I came to Lviv 2023, I filmed these commemorative events on, for which I came to, and this was, I was filming, but it was not possible for me to film in the city as I did it before. So not because I was afraid. So there were also before some situations which were not that easy. But of course, yes, I was also afraid because you don't feel comfortable anymore to be with a camera in the city because people react differently. But I also had a very different feeling to become this kind of observer. I did not film a lot during this trip.
Thank you very much.
I think we can open the discussion to other participants to join us, to our public. If you have any question, please just ask. We are a small group, but I think it can be really positive for the discussion. So just please start your microphone and ask the questions if you have any.
Well, if you allow me, yeah, hello. Ekaterina, thank you so much for your presentation, and it's motivated me to read the book. I have not a comment, but a question. You mentioned commemoration as a protest. Just, well, please elaborate a little bit. Protest against what or against whom? I think it could be, well, quite different stuff, protesting against something, protesting against establishing order, against authorities, protesting to show, well, the group or community that, well, we exist. But commemoration as a protest, just, well, please give me, navigate me in which direction you, well, presented your material in the book. Yeah, thanks.
So there is actually one chapter, the one which is dedicated to the Monument of Glory, and actually all of the events which have happened in front of this monument could be seen as actions of protest, but they were conducted by different groups, so the goals of protests were different. So those who were referring to the Russian influenced idea of Ukrainian history, they were coming together and they were protesting against Ukrainian government. So they were protesting against not just about how the government deals with the past, but they were also protesting for their social claims. So there were people in a difficult financial situation, people who were retired, and they were coming with declared goal to remember the fallen in the Great Patriotic War, but actually they were saying our payments are too low, we have no medicine, we have such a bad treatment. That was the obvious protest. But there were also other groups who were intending to remove the monument from the urban landscape, and there were acts of vandalism against the monument, and there were also obvious protests.
Do we have any other questions from our audience? I have a lot of questions because I'm doing my research on Poland. So the commemoration of Second World War is easy in Poland, as long as it doesn't touch the Shoah and the participation as perpetrators in Shoah. But it's clear we were like victims from both sides. But I think it's much more complicated in Ukraine, especially in the situation in the Russian war, as Ukraine's saw Russia and UdSSR as a perpetrator in the Second World War and tried to make the Germans as a kind of allies. So there's a different situation. So my question is, can this commemoration of the end of the Second World War be celebrated as something positive, just because the war was over, without the connection, the context of being occupied by Russia again, becoming the part of Soviet Union again? What was the focus of a goal of the Second World War, just getting out of Russian occupation? That's the first thing. And the second thing, after the 2022, after the full-scale invasion, are the people celebrating in this post-Soviet way, kind in danger, as being have been seen as traitors of Ukraine because of the invasion? Because as I understood, before the invasion, it was okay to celebrate this way, but did it shift that really? I can imagine in Poland it would be really dangerous, probably. And as you said, you also have this nationalistic UPA and Bandera groups. So this is my question. If it's still okay for people in Ukraine, if some people seeing the end of the world in the Russian kind of way of commemoration, if it's still accepted.
I cannot really respond this question because it lies outside of my proper research. But what I know that this hill of glory is in such condition when such commemorations are not possible. The field of mass now they are the graves of those who fall in the contemporary war. It's totally impossible to commemorate the 9th of May there. I don't know how it's now on the legal level, if it's allowed, probably, but I don't know. So it's it demands a deeper research. I don't think it is possible. But before 2024, it was totally possible. It was a competition of attention, so that the representatives of the city and of the government, they came to the celebrations of the 8th of May, but not to those of the 9th of May. And so the people involved in the organization of the events dedicated to the 9th of May, they were complaining why they're not here, but they're invited and they're not appearing. But that was absolutely possible, and people were coming, especially on the 9th of May, because there are also some other events dedicated to the Soviet narrative. It's the 27th of July. It's the official name of this commemorative day, the liberation of Lviv from fascists, 1944. So on these occasions, only people who are really involved in this commemorative work were coming together. They were not too many, but 9th of May was really well attended, and like regular people also came to on this day to these certain places. And so your first question, I'm not sure if I really understood it. You meant it as a more general. What do I think? Is it possible to celebrate the end of the Second World War in Lviv? Or
if you have any data, because it's really, I think it was complicated after the fall of the UdSSR, after you lost an official narrative that was forced to way how it should be celebrated. And then this till the start of the till 2014, so the Russian invasion. I think I'm not an expert on Ukraine, but I can imagine it was the same way it has happened in all the post-Soviet countries, that there was the weight of searching what we want to commemorate, how we want to commemorate, how we want to position ourselves to, for example, the end of the Second World War. Because for a lot of countries, it was the beginning of the other kind of occupation. This depending if you were part of. So it was, but I think it is much more complicated if you were on the side of German side fighting against Russia. And there's a different situation that we have in Poland, that we were occupied by Germany and Russia. So it was no difference. There was two kinds of occupation. And it was my question, how was the way the Ukraine?
I got it now.
Yeah.
I think it's different than in Poland. I think it was there were much more voices instead just these simple double occupation narrative. Of course, there are also these voices with this double occupation, but there were also many who were not sharing this opinion. But I think in Ukraine, those who share this idea of double occupation, they say, yes, we were occupied by both, but Soviets were worse. So that's Germans were bad, but Soviets were worse. And but there were also many who were against this double occupation narrative. And I think in Ukraine, it was a longer process. I think that these different narratives could really coexist more or less, not always peacefully together, but they were coexisting. So sometimes there were problems, but people were also very tolerant. So some people who are not, especially those who are not involved in any specific commemorative groups, just regular people, they were quite open and tolerant to different voices. I would describe it like this.
Can I maybe add a few words, since your question was not just specifically about Lviv, but about Ukraine in general? So, I mean, we can say for sure that even after February 22, many people in Ukraine continued to participate in commemorative practices on the 9th of May. And Mykola and I looked at this specifically for the occupied territories, but it's also the case outside. So eventually, and this is something that Ekaterina also describes in the book, for a long time, both the 8th and the 9th of May had an official status from the perspective of the Ukrainian state, until eventually Zelensky kind of abolished the 9th of May as an official holiday. But for a lot of people on the ground, it still continues to be an important holiday. And this is also something that is stressed in the book. Of course, many more people by several orders of magnitude in Ukraine were part of the Red Army than were in the UPA. So when you say, well, you know, in Ukraine, they really collaborated with the Germans, I mean, that's a very small, I mean, it's a minority of people, right? So the biographical experience for most Ukrainians at the time was much more likely to be participation in the Red Army, which also means that it's a part of family memory for many more people. And what we're seeing now is, and we can point to surveys, and once again, Mykola Humaniuk did some of them, surveys and focus groups. When you ask people, what do you celebrate and when do you celebrate it? Many people will say, for example, well, I think that we should now celebrate the 8th of May because it's now the official holiday, but we don't really know how. We haven't yet developed a commemorative repertoire for a date that would be different from the Soviet repertoire for the 9th of May. So what often happens in Ukraine as a whole is that some people continue to celebrate the 9th, some people do both, and some people celebrate the 8th, but they basically kind of continue doing so in a repertoire that is very much influenced by a Soviet and post-Soviet tradition. So it's a very sort of complex and hybrid situation.
This is a little bit of difference when I see in Poland that the 9th of May is of course important, but I think the Poland the most focus switched on the being the sovereignty regain in 1918. So I think that's just there was the solving the problem, that we are don't have this continuity of 9th May in the Soviet kind of. I'm not sure. I don't do a research and how it's important for people. I think it's still very important that there is the end. That was the end of the world, but I don't think that a lot of people in Poland try to celebrate it in any kind of way. It's much more than 11th of November or the 3rd of May as the Constitution.
But that's also what I'm asking myself, and I don't know, and I think no one really knows, specifically in Lviv, all these people who came to commemorate 9th of May. So there were really many. What has happened to them? And I don't think that they're coming. I don't think it's possible in the public space of May to gather on this specific date and to remember on the end of the Second World War like it was possible before. But what do these people think now? What has changed? The special research is needed to be conducted to answer this question. But these people, so I'm sure that most of them are still alive. They were not that old, so they were. Many of them were like in middle age. Most of them actually between 40 or 50. So that means they're like, not much older now. What has changed for them? So how do they see the situation now? Because there is this idea that the western of Ukraine, and specifically Lviv, is very pro-Ukrainian, but what I saw that there were really many people who were also representing this pro-Russian or pro-Soviet or hybrid idea of history.
And when you are saying that they were not people, as Misha said, serving in the Red Army, so it was kind of post-memory joining this, because they were too young to so it was the kind of either kind of socialization during the UdSSR, less than commemorating Red Army as this one soldier dressed in the probably could be a part of my maybe not even here, but even not even here.
And it's quite interesting because he comes or he came. So I saw him twice, 2016 and 2017, and talked to him. And then it was an interviewer from Radio Svoboda who was also talking to him. And one year it was she, and another year it was another Ukrainian radio representative, and their questions were actually quite aggressive. They were aiming to show that he is not a proper veteran, he is not a proper participant of the war, and I know I have forgotten he was born 1941 or even 44. I think 40, so he's definitely not he answered when he was born, but he said he was probably 41 because he's a kid of war.
I have one more question, and then maybe we have other questions or other people asking questions or having questions. If someone has questions, just please ask. But if not, I have the first picture you showed us with people staying taken before the war with Stop War, Stop Putin. There was a flag. Was this a Polish flag on the side, the white, red? It was interesting for me of the context.
No, I don't think so.
I was just like, okay, why?
No, it's something else.
Because it would be interesting in the context why there is a
it's
Polish
definitely
flag.
Not the Polish one. I can later I can zoom in and some other pictures from that day. No, that was definitely
not the Polish one. It was
no.
I was just focused on shortly focus on this flag. Like, okay, It
No,
would be
no, no, no,
interesting
no.
to know how the connection was and why it was there.
No,
Because
it was definitely not. And actually, this is I have this event on my on the book cover. So this one. So,
yes, this
yeah.
is one, the
Yeah.
red flag.
Yeah. But actually, this is the one event which I'm not really analyzing in the book, but I really like this photo on the cover because of this Stop Putin, Stop War banner. Also because this picture was taken 2017, so it also
yes.
shows that the war was already there. And what I a bit miss in my title, the name Lviv, so the name of the city, because this title was too long. I could not include this, but I included the image of the city, which is immediately recognizable for everyone who knows the city. So I think it works well.
Do we have any other questions, any further questions? If not, I would just like to thank you very much for your really insightful analysis of the book. I think it's really important, as it's written in German, for people that are not speaking German, just to know about what's included in the book. And I think it's really, fortunately, I can read, I speak German, so I access the book, I can read it. I think it's really interesting, especially in the time of the changes, the way we are commemorating or what we are commemorating, how it changes to say the new world order that is, yes, that is developing now, and we can be the, we can see it every day, how it changes. And I would like to thank you, Ekaterina, and you, Misha, for the really, really interesting discussion about the book that got us a lot of information about the book till now without even reading it. And I also thank you very much for joining us, our audience, and for the questions we got. And if you want to see this again or just recommend it, it will be on YouTube, I think, next week. And thank you very much for the evening.
No, thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Have a good evening.